The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it, here to receive and uphold it, about to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us now begin our class on the Surangama Sutra. Currently, we are discussing what is the world. In our previous class, in the Surangama Sutra, the explanation that it was given by within the Surangama Sutra, it was rather quite special and different. The world refers to the combination of time and space. So the 10 directions and the 3 times is called the world. There are lots of profound meanings infused in this claim, in this particular teaching. Usually, whenever we refer to the meaning of the world, we would say that it's the materialistic world and the sentient world, or the animated and inanimate. But when we truly to make the observation with our wisdom, we would be able to see that they are simply false. The world is simply the combination of time and space. It is simply the conventional appearances, or in another word, illusory manifestations. Yesterday, we already also expounded that we can divide the directions into the 4, the east, north, west, and south. And in terms of time, there's the past, present, and future. If we were to further divide it into more detail, then it is 3 times 4, or 4 times 3, which becomes 12. And then if we were to divide it, if we were to further multiply it, that would be the 2nd level and then the 3rd level. So the numbers goes to 120 and then multiplied into 1200. After the class, many of you engaged in very heated discussions, and many of you got quite confused as well and don't really know how those numbers came about. In fact, compared to the math that we've studied, the numbers and calculations are much simpler. To summarize it, there is the time and space. Time multiplied to space. In terms of space, there is the 4 major directions, the 4 subdirections. On top of that, there is the zenith and nadir, the 10 particular directions. And then in terms of time, there is the past, present, and future. And then each of them would also have the 3 times. That is the past of the past, the past of the present, and past of the future. And same as the present moment and the future times. On top of that, there is the moment of now, so the 10 different times as well. So the 10 times are multiplied to the 10 directions, and then multiply by the infinite numbers of the sentient beings as well as the materialistic existence, which would become infinite. In this way, we can truly see that everything is empty. Form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. We would be able to come to that conclusion through simply inference. And then we usually would have this general conception that wherever the sun would arise, that is the east, and wherever it goes down is the west. But are there true 4 directions that is solidly existent or independently existent? There is no such conception. There is no such existence at all. For the same reason, the kind of observation can apply to time as well. We have made such observations of the 3 times during our studies of Bodhisattva Charivatara, the 400 verses, Madhyamika Karika. at the time of without making the observation, there is the manifestation of the three times. Yes, the past existence, the present, and the future, but those are simply the names. Many people would be very sure that I do exist in the present moment, but in the Bodhisattva Charivatara, in the commentary, there is the observation of the non-existence of ourselves at the present moment, or there is the observation, according to Khenpo Genhua, of the Oma, based on the three syllables Oma Hong, as well as in the wish-fulfilling treasury, also in the valid cognition. There are all different types of observations and inferences to come to the realization that there is no such thing that is partless time or shortest unit of time. There is no such solid existence at all. For people who've studied for many years, you would definitely come to such agreement. The great compassionate Buddha would state that all phenomena are simply empty, but he did not say that there is no existence manifesting in the conventional world. In fact, he would also state that all the things, as well as sentient beings, as well as time, as well as space, they would manifest, but they are not as solidly and independently existent as how we thought it would. Now, the method of observation from the Surangama Sutra would lead to the core of the Prajna Paramita teaching of Buddhism. That is, everything cannot be obtained. There is nothing that you can obtain as a solid existent entity. By now, we've studied this teaching enough that I believe many of you are capable of parroting it. But I think simply speaking of it is not very meaningful. You need to embody it. Otherwise, you would just hold on to the existence and the solidity of the existence more so than before, which is not helpful at all. Throughout our study contemplation of the Dharma, we have to develop a certainty in the view. According to Mipa Rinpoche, in Beacon of Certainty, he stated that we have to give rise to the certainty of a view. Without such certainty, we would not be able to give rise to wisdom. Without wisdom, we would not be able to eradicate confusion. Without eradicating the confusion, we would not be able to attain liberation. So let us continue with our classes. Yesterday, through my observation, I think majority of you did understand how to calculate it, except the last one. It says that it increased it 3 times itself, multiplied by 10, and again by 10 to reach 1,000. 1,200 is the greatest possible efficacy of the 6 organs. Now, this part is very much related to today's content, so I'll repeat it a little bit. Over here, in general, it states that out of the 6 roots, each of them embodies 1,200 qualities. The qualities also refers to functions. In the next part of our class, we will discuss some of the roots would embody 1,200 particular functions, and some could only have about 800. Why is that? It is because in order to talk about the function of root, it is expounded from the angle of the object. In terms of possibilities, that is, because each of the roots, some of the roots would not be able to manifest in different situations. Also, the roots, there are the inferior roots, there are the superior roots, there are the lack of roots, sometimes the multiple roots, there are different kinds of situations. And over here, we're going to talk about that the I root has 1,200, not necessarily have 1,200 functions, rather sometimes it would have only 800. And there are different possibilities to it, and there are explanations of it. Sometimes we would be able to only perceive, for example, that if I were to look to the east, I would not be able to see my back. back, then at that time I have only 800 possibilities of perception or 800 possibilities of its functions. And then if I were not to look at the East, but look at the West, look to the West, then maybe the 1200 types of functions could all be fulfilled. So it is very much depending on the different situations. Because of the functions of the roots are different, and because it is in reference of the object, but in general, the 6 roots should have the 1200 types of functions or qualities. Unfortunately, I didn't get enough time to read into other commentaries, but I think we can further discuss some of the functions of the roots, because some of the roots don't have the 1200s of the functions. We need to further contemplate upon it. Now, let's continue with the Surangama Sutra over here. The Buddha said that Ananda, you can thereby establish their value. For example, the eyes see darkness behind and the light in front. The front is totally light, the back is totally dark. With your peripheral vision included, you can see 2/3 around the most. Therefore, its capacity can be expressed as an efficacy which is most complete. 1/3 of its efficacy is without virtue. Know then that the eye have an efficacy of only 800. Usually the roots would uphold the 1200 efficacies or functions, but the eyes only have 800. Beginning from here, we will further discuss each of the 6 roots. What are the different functions to it? And let's look at the root of the eye first. The Buddha told Ananda, saying that, well, you should know that out of all the roots, the functions can be different, and there is a difference in the different capacities or in the different types of superiority of them. According to the Tibetan translation, it is stated that some of the roots has more and some of them has less of the functions, because some of the roots has 1200 functions and some has only 800. So you can place those numbers as inferior or superior or as more or less. There are different descriptions to it. That's a summary. Now let's continue to look at the teaching. For example, the Tibetan translation didn't say for example, rather it continued to say that the eyes at the time of looking, the eyes would see darkness behind and the light in front. What it means is that since we know that the eyes grow in such a way that we see the front, and then whatever we see at the front are light, and whatever we can't see is presented over here by using the word dark. Other than people with those miraculous penetration of their eyes or divine eyes, the sentient beings or the mundane beings' flesh eyes can only perceive that of the front. Of course, that excludes people with eye disease or without good eyesight. Earlier, I forgot about my glasses, and I had to ask people to grab my glasses from my home. Otherwise, I really couldn't see clearly. It would be a bit difficult for me now. So we can see that sometimes, though that we are looking at the front, it is not necessary that we can see them clearly either. And then in terms of the peripheral vision, you can see about 2/3 around at most. And then the Buddha associates that there are the 400 functions that can be used to look at the front and 400 associated to the back, and then 400 associated to the left and right. So we won't be able to see the 400 at the back, and the two-thirds of the two sides can be seen through our peripheral vision, but 1/3 of those cannot be perceived. You probably never have contemplated upon this. Living till today, you probably had never contemplated upon it, isn't it? Whenever you try your peripheral vision, I think a majority of you would not be able to see the 1/3 of that vision, that peripheral vision. The 2/3 can be seen. Then 2/3 can be seen from each side. The 1/3 of the left side cannot be seen. 1/3 of the right side cannot be seen. In such a way, we would not be able to have all the 1200s of functions of the eyes. So we cannot reveal all the functions of the eyes. And then 1/3 of its efficacy is without virtue. Only 2/3 have the virtue or have the function. And now that is just a simple math. 1200 divided by 3 and then times 2, that is 800. You can calculate it in such a way. Or another way of calculating is that there are the 400 functions right at the front. We would not be able to review all the 400 functions that is behind the eyes. So on the two sides, we can see 200 on the left and 200 on the right. That is then 800. We would only be able to reveal the 800 functions, 800 virtues. Other than people who have attained the miraculous penetration of divine eye, the majority of the mundane beings can only perceive that of the 2/3 of to reveal the 2/3 of its complete virtue, complete functions. According to the Tibetan translation, the eye faculty, in terms of its subject and then the object, there are 800 only. According to the Tibetan translation, that is, there is the object that can be perceived, can be enjoyed, and then subject that can enjoy. That's the Tibetan translation. This is the first one. The second one is the explanation on the ear faculty. The 6 roots and the functions associated to them would alternate to the fullest functions and the partial functions. For example, the eyes could see only partial of the functions, could fulfill only partial of the functions, and then the ears can fulfill all of the functions, and then the nose can fulfill all of the functions, not the tongues, not the body, but the mind could. There is an alternation of the numbers. You can look at it later and then make your own analysis. For example, the ears hear everywhere in the 10 directions without loss. They hear movements, whether far or near, and stillness without bounds. Know then that the organ of hearing is complete with an efficacy of the 1200. the ear faculty would be able to receive all kinds of sounds surrounding it. The ear faculty would differ than the eye faculty because the eye faculty would not be able to perceive whatever is behind it, but the ear faculty would be able to perceive from all directions whatever is surrounded, whatever is around the ear faculty. Not only that it could hear from whatever is surrounding the ear faculty, the ear faculty could also perceive of movements and stillness. Of course, if it's too far away, it would be difficult for us to hear. For example, we can't hear the sound that is currently occurring in Potala Palace. But generally speaking, we would be able to hear what is far and what is near. We can hear the sound of conch in the morning, though that it could be quite far away from you, or something that is very close to you. We can hear those kinds of movements of sounds. Also, when there is a stillness, when there is quiet, when there is no sound, that can be heard as well. According to the Surangama Sutra, when there is quietness, that can also be perceived by the ear as well. That is the object to the ear faculty. So the ear faculty would be able to perceive of the far and near, would be able to hear the movement as well as the movement, which is a sign of complete with an efficacy of 1200. Different than the eye faculty, the ear faculty would be able to fulfill all the functions. All the 1200 functions associated to time and space. This is the second root. Now the third root is the root of the nose. For example, the nose smells odor with each inhalation and exhalation of the breath. It is deficient at the point between the inhalation and exhalation. The organ of smell can be considered to be deficient by 1/3. Know then that the nose has an efficacy of only 800. So there's an alternation. Can you see the pattern now? There is the only 800 associated to eye and 1200, which is the perfect functions associated to ears. And then when it comes to our nose, it is only it has only the efficacy of 800. When we smell with our nose, there is the inhalation and then exhalation. Inhale, exhale. When I went for the MRI examinations, the doctors would ask me to inhale, exhale, hold. Sometimes I would even dream of that. Sometimes when the doctor asked me to breathe out, I would breathe in, and sometimes when the doctor asked me to hold, and I would breathe. I tried that on purpose. And I simply wanted to test whether the doctors would find out. Since at the time I was lying inside the MRI machine, and the doctors would have no way to know whether I'm inhaling or exhaling. I was simply testing. Anyhow, when we're breathing, inhaling or exhaling, the process of the function of the nose root. But when there is a gap in between, without inhaling or exhaling, then naturally there is a pause where the nose is no longer functioning. It is not working. For the root of the nose, at the time when you're not inhaling nor exhaling, it is simply paused from its function. At the time of pause, I think it's easy to understand because it's related to time. Majority of time for the mundane beings, we would be breathing during sleep and breathing naturally throughout the day and night. There is no interruption, barely any interruptions. If we were to counted in terms of the units of time, majority of sentient beings at the time of having that pause, it is rather quite short. So not only we need to take in the consideration of time, we also need to take in the consideration of the space as well. Altogether, it is about 1/3 of the time and space is interrupted. 1/3 is in inhalation and 1/3 is in exhalation. We are not calculating from just the angle of the rhythm of the breathing or by calculating it by the unit of time. Rather, we are taking in consideration of the time and space. So, since the complete of the merits would be 1200, and then the 1/3 of the functions of the root of the nose is lacking. For such reason, there are 800 efficacies to the nose root, which is the same to the eye faculty, but it cannot compare to the ear faculty. In the later part, the Buddha will continue to talk about the merits of the ear faculty to Ananda. To the Shravakas, it is easier for the Shravakas to receive the teachings through the ear faculty. It is more supreme to receive teachings that way. So we can see in the later part, we'll learn from the Surangama Sutra in the later part which root is easier to practice upon, which one is not as easy. Out of the 6 roots, the ear faculty is quite important, and then the mind faculty would be more difficult. That is why we would practice upon the mind faculty in the later part. And to the mundane beings, not only to the Shravakas, but to the mundane beings, the mind would be difficult to practice upon, including Ananda, though Ananda had already attained the first fruition. Now let's look at the fourth one, which is the tongue. For example, the tongue can proclaim the entirety of worldly and transcendental wisdom. Although language varies according to locality, the principles go beyond boundaries of any kind. Know then, the organs of the tongue is complete with the efficacy of 1200. The tongue faculty has 2 major functions. The first one is taste, and the other one is use it as speech, according to Master Oyi. Usually, we would talk about the function of taste of the faculty of the tongue, but not very much of the speech. But in the Surangama Sutra, it approaches the tongue faculty from a different angle, and the most important function of it is speech. If our tongue is not good, if our tongue cannot pronounce clearly, it would be difficult for others to understand us. I remember that a group of the authorities came to the Doma monastery and give lots of instructions on various kinds of policies. And then they invited great masters to give speeches as well. And then the first one that's invited was Toku Diksha. And Toku smiled and said that, well, the root of tongue is not as good. Maybe we should invite Khenpo Deba to give a speech. He meant that I don't have good eloquence. It would be better to invite Khenpo Deba to give a speech. But of course, he's humbly made a joke. Now, we can understand it is quite important to have the wisdom of eloquence. And the major root that we need to use is our tongue faculty, whether we can speak eloquently or not, whether we can expound clearly or not, whether we can have good logic at the same time as expounding it clearly. It is very much related to the root of the tongue. The root of the tongue can expound the teachings of both worldly and transcendental. According to the commentary, it says that at the time of hearing some worldly lyrics and songs, he would be quite alert. Those are the teachings, those are the merits of the worldly speech. Some of the great masters of the past, even when they hear those words that's fused with desire and with greed, they would still be able to attain realization. So from the angle of speech, there is no difference in the speech. However, people would be able to hear the language and attain realization. For such reason, the root of the tongue would be able to expound both of the worldly and transcendental wisdom. Also, the language is quite limited because it is restrained to locality. There are different kinds of languages. There are people whom are fluent in many different languages, and there are people whom can barely speak of their own language. But those are simply expressions of language. The teachings of the language, however, the meaning of the language can be infinite. For example, at the time of pointing out the nature of mind can be expounded by the limited language as well. The language has limitation as well. On top of that, the language would be able to expound the meaning of the worldly as well as the transcendental wisdom. In such a way, we can see how the tongue faculty fulfills the efficacy of the 1200. It is without any obstructions. Of course, this is explained from the angle of no obstruction of explaining the wisdom from both worldly and transcendental. Not only 1200, if you were to specify, there must be infinite numbers of merits and virtues that can be expounded by the tongue faculty. The great masters of the past, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, all manifest in such a way that they would expound teachings through their tongue faculty and demonstrated the infinite wisdom from both worldly and transcendentals. For such reason, there is the efficacy of 1200. Now, the next one, for example, the body is aware of touch, registering it as pain or pleasure. When it makes contact, it is aware of the thing touched. When it is in isolation, it has no tactile knowledge of other things. Isolation has a single and a contact has a dual aspect. The organ of the body can be considered as deficient by 1/3. Know then that the body has an efficacy of only 800. Now let's talk about the root of the body. When it comes to the body, there could be the sensation of pleasure or pain. The object could both bring suffering and pain or pleasant sensation. There are different objects that could bring about different sensations to the root of body. When it makes contact, whatever kinds of object that makes contact to the root of the body, it is aware of the thing touched. You would be able to be aware whether the thing that you touched is rough or gentle or soft or hot or cold. You would be able to have that sensation. When in isolation, when you do not have those objects anymore, when those objects are no longer associated to this body root anymore, it has no tactile knowledge of other things. Let it be cold or hot, light or heavy, any kinds of those tactile sensations would be parted. In such a way, isolation has a single and contact has a dual aspect, which is isolation has 1/3 of the functions and then the contact has 2/3 of the functions. From a worldly perspective, maybe we would have less of the contact and more of the isolation. But over here, we are looking at it from the sensation, the aspect of the sensation of the body, as well as from the direction and the time aspect. In this aspect, the isolation would be less and contact would be more. So there are 2/3 that's associated, 2/3 of the functions that's associated to touch of the body faculty. And over here it says that, as you can see, that the body can be considered as deficient by 1/3. So there is a lack of 1/3 of the efficacy of the root of the body. And you can do the simple math. The 2/3 of 1200 is 800 of the efficacies associated to body root. According to the commentary of palm and fingers, it also talks more from the angle of the objects and subjects. Since when there is a contact, then there is object and subject, therefore it would be calculated as 2/3, because at the time of isolation, there is no more of the objects anymore, and that is why it is only of 1/3. So that's how the explanation goes in the commentary. Now let's look at the sixth one. It says that, for example, the mind silently includes all worldly and transcendental dharmas of the 10 directions and the 3 periods of time, regardless of whether it be sagely or ordinary. Everything is included in its boundlessness. Know then that the organ of the mind is complete with an efficacy of 1200. So the mind, the root of the mind, it simply silently includes all worldly and transcendental dharmas of 10 directions and 3 periods of time. There is no speech, there is no sound to it, rather the mind just silently includes everything. The worldly people would often use the saying that the space is infinite, the ocean is vast, and what is even bigger than that, that is our mind. It can include all. It is the most inclusive of all, because it can include of the worldly as well as the transcendental wisdom. It could include all the sagely, all the noble ones, as well as the ordinary beings, dharmas. And in terms of the consciousness, it could include all the wisdom, all the way from the mundane being to the sagely to the Buddhahood. Simply, we would exchange that word to wisdom. Other than that, everything is the same. Within our mind consciousness, it could include everything, all the way to the boundless. For such reason, the mind consciousness would be able to uphold all the virtues. It is completely complete with the efficacy of the 1200. By now, we have learned that out of the 6 roots, the 3 of them are completed with the efficacy of 1200, and the other 3 has 800 of the efficacies. It is quite even. It is not that there is 0 and then the other one is 1200. Rather, it is 800 associated to the other 3 roots. And then the Buddha started to expound some pith instructions to Ananda, saying that you should study beginning from one organ, one root, and then you can continue. But Ananda seems to be still quite confused, and then he would get more criticism from the Buddha. Anyhow, the Buddha said that, Ananda, now you wish to oppose the flow of desire that leads to birth and death. You should turn back the flow of organs to reach a state of neither production nor extinction. The Buddha said that, well, since you're here to oppose the flow of desire that leads to birth and death, instead of going with the flow of birth and death, you should rather oppose the flow. You should rather resolve and find the root of such flow. We need to find the root of the flow. We need to find the root of the problem so that you would no longer take rebirth in samsara. If you want to attain liberation. And if you want to attain liberation, you have to find the root of birth and death. After seeking to the root of the birth and death, the root of samsara, you would be able to, at the time of attaining the understanding of no production and no cessation, that is the time that you can resolve this problem. So in order to attain such a state of no production and no extinction, what do you need to do? The Buddha over here says that you should investigate. You have to observe and investigate further to its most fine detail all the 6 functioning organs to see which are uniting, which are isolated. These functioning organs, the 6 organs are usually referred to as the functioning organs that would be able to perceive of the objects. You need to make the observation whether which one would unite and which one are isolated, which are deep, which are shallow, and which will penetrate perfectly and which are not perfect. The Buddha said that you have to make these observations. Many of the commentaries would just quote it but not really explain it, so it's very difficult to understand what it means or what the Buddha is referring here. But I think in the commentary of Master Yuan Ying, the explanation is more clear. He pointed out that out of the 6 roots, which one is uniting, which one is isolating? The nose, tongue, and the body has both uniting and isolating. For example, the tongue at the time of tasting, and then the nose at the time of contacting the object. The dust of the object would be in contact with the nose root. The other one is the body, the root of the body, which also has a uniting and isolating, since we've already talked about it. So at the time of practicing with these 3, it would be more difficult since there is uniting and isolating. And then what are simply isolating? Those are the eye faculty, the faculty of the ear, and then the mind. Out of the 6 roots, the body, tongue, and nose needs to unite with the others, which would be difficult to practice upon, and then the ones that's isolated would be easier to practice. The eye faculty, for example, it is not that the eye faculty would directly make contact with the others right away, nor of the ears, nor of mind consciousness, nor the mind. So those 3 would be easier to be practiced upon, to engage in practice. The previous 3 are difficult to be practiced with, so Ananda would just directly give it up. And then he would engage in the easier 3. Now the easier 3 would be the eye, ear, and mind. You should differentiate which one is shallow and which one is deep. According to the Tibetan translation, this one is a bit different. It rather asks the question, which one is uniting, which one is isolating, which one is easier to be practiced upon, which one is more difficult to be practiced on. And out of the 3, the mind is the most deep. So it is difficult for us to practice on it right away. And then in terms of the shallow ones, then it is the eye and the ears. We still have the hope to practice on those. Out of these 2, the ears and the eyes, which one penetrates and which one does not? In the previous part, we've already studied that the eye root cannot penetrate. The functions associated to the root of the eyes are not perfect because it could only perceive that of the front and 2/3 of the 2 sides, but not the back. In terms of the ears, we can see that it is the most perfect one to be practiced upon. The root of the ear has passed the exam. It is ranked as number 1 to be practiced upon. In the later part, we will also make the observation whether they are of one entity or of other entity, and what is perfect and what is not. The perfect organ, the awakened organ, is quite an important term in the Chinese Buddhism. At the time of translation, it is translated as a natural wisdom. This is the translation that we have into the Tibetan language. Not sure if there is an evidence to it, but this is the translation. Anyhow, we've already investigated on the 6 roots and picked the most easiest one to be worked with is the ear faculty. So over here, the Buddha said that once you have awakened to the organ which penetrates perfectly, you should thereupon reverse the flow of its beginningless involvement in false karma. Then you will know the difference between one that penetrates perfectly and one that does not. Then a day and an eon would be one and the same. Over here, the Buddha, after making this analysis to Ananda, he states that through this ear faculty, you would be able to come to the understanding of a perfect penetration, which is translated as natural wisdom. Then in such a way you would be able to overturn the flow of the river of karma, the river of delusion. One who attained this perfect penetration and the one that has not attained this perfect penetration, there is a great difference between such 2 practitioners. It is is the difference between a day and an aeon. So the difference between someone who would be able to attain liberation within one day and liberation within one aeon, it is similar to, for example, those of us who practice Mahayana would be able to attain liberation within one lifetime, and people who practice the Vajrayana would attain liberation after aeons. And the Buddha said that if you can attain this perfect penetration in understanding the roots through this practice, you would be able to resolve many of the issues within one day. But for the one who have not attained this understanding of the perfect penetration, then one would not be able to attain liberation even for one aeon. And that's the difference between one day and one aeon. That's the distance between the two that attained perfect penetration or not. So the Buddha over here stressed to Ananda that you have to practice upon this pith instruction in such a way you would be able to attain liberation in a very short period of time. If you can attain this perfect penetration, then you are quite hopeful to attain liberation in this lifetime, without which then it is very difficult for us to have a confirmation to even have a human body. It's hard to say. And it's hard to say if we will ever be able to receive such pith instructions again. For this reason, we need to make the resolve that we are going to attain liberation. If we can have this longing to attain liberation at the time of studying Surangama Sutra, if you want to attain this realization and this perfect penetration, then you have the opportunity to attain, have this awakenment. The Buddha over here reviewed the merits and qualities of the 6 roots nature, that is the perfect penetration, that is clear, that is perfect, that is all-pervasive. And then the Buddha over here says that I have now revealed to you the fundamental efficacy of the tranquil, perfect, bright of the 6. This is what the numbers are. It is up to you to select which one to enter. I will explain more to aid your progress in it. The Buddha said that while I have already expounded this particular teaching, and I do want you to make progressions on the path, I really wish that you can pick one particular route or just select one out of the 6 to enter. In such a way, Ananda would definitely be able to make progress. And the Buddha obviously doesn't want to criticize him every day. He said that I wish you, Ananda, to make progress. In Tibet, we say that a stick cannot be stretched longer. Similarly, it doesn't matter how other people would try. A person that doesn't want to make progress would not be able to make any progress. Over here, the Buddha says that, Ananda, you should make some progress. I've already told you the efficacies, the virtues of the 6 roots, as well as the numbers that's associated to it. Now you should find one particular way, one particular route to enter and to engage in practice. To the Buddhas, of course, there is no difference for the 6 roots, but for you, Ananda, you do need to pick one, otherwise you won't be able to enter into the practice at all. And then the Buddha says that thus come one of the 10 directions cultivated by means of all the 18 realms and obtained a perfect and unsurpassed Bodhi. All of them were generally adequate. They would be able to practice on whichever one, the 6 roots, 6 objects, 6 consciousness. You can practice upon whichever one and enter from whichever one. You can practice upon the root of nose, the ear, the body, the mind, whichever one you would be able to enter would be wonderful if you are the thus come one. And you can choose from the 6 consciousness and the 6 roots as well. There is no less and no more for the ones that has already attained Buddhahood. There are the kind of practitioners that would be able to attain liberation from the eye faculty, the ones attain liberation from the nose faculty, and from lots of the Zen stories, as well as the Mahayana stories of enlightenment. Lots of practitioners, by relying on sound or taste or look, would be able to lead that practitioner to liberation. The kinds of practitioners with the superior capacity would be able to practice in whichever kinds of dharma, and then they would be able to gain benefits from them. They would be able to listen to this dharma and that dharma. They would be happy to receive those teachings and be happy to engage in practice from whichever angle. Throughout history, there are great masters, as I said earlier, some simply by listening to sounds of desire, and then they would be able to attain liberation. And some, after entering into a brothel, they attain liberation. Some at the time of killing, some at the time of hearing the sounds of sentient beings. So all of those sharp capacity practitioners would be able to attain liberation in whichever way out of the 18 dhatus. To them, all of these are in equanimity. And then the Buddha said that, but you are at an inferior level and are not yet able to perfect a comfortable wisdom among them. Therefore, I shall give you an explanation so that you will be able to enter deeply into one door. The Buddha over here then says that, well, because you have such an inferior capacity, and you should enter into this one way, one door, one method. Without my pointing out to this one method, you would not be able to attain the freedom, the wisdom of freedom, like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That is why I would give you such a clear explanation of the Dharma. After I finish giving you this explanation, you should choose one particular method and then enter into this one door. Enter one without falseness, and the 6 sense organs will be simultaneously pure. If you can enter into one with complete purity, if you can enter one with great depth without any falseness, then you would be able to attain the understanding of all the others. According to the 400 verses, the emptiness of one particular Dharma is the emptiness of all the Dharmas. So from one particular understanding would be able to lead to the understanding of all, would be able to lead to the penetration of all. So if you can attain one without falseness, and then the 6 sense organs will be simultaneously pure. We can see that the Buddha is of great compassion. He pointed out this particular method for Ananda to enter, but Ananda later would ask, what do you mean by this one door, to enter this one door with falseness? He would then continue to ask those questions. Poor Ananda being scolded by the Buddha again, saying that he's of inferior capacity, not the same with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We'll look at it tomorrow.
Chupum tsone jowa jowa shang